You're listening to Neurodivergent Mates. Hello and welcome to another episode of Neurodivergent Mates. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, joined with my main man, Photon John. Kev, what's going on, brother?
Yeah, all rugged up here in sunny Queensland. How about yourself?
All rugged up. Oh, you need a harden up, I think, mate. What's going on, man? It's probably cooler down here than what it is up there.
No, the new house is on the water, and so we just get the sea breeze.
Yeah, true. You would get that.
Yeah.
You know what? You know what's interesting about that, right? So I live in Sydney, right? And, you know, we live sort of out west type of thing, and it can get really hot. But then, say if you go into the city on the harbour, man, the temperature can be like a 10-degree drop.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, you must get something similar there where you're just feeling the breeze pretty strong, yeah?
Yeah, lots of wind, lots of cold.
Nice.
But I like it.
Nice. But I tell you what, we should really get stuck into this today. You're excited for our guest today, mate?
I am. She's organised some very cool things that I've been a part of. So.
Nice. So today what we're going to be talking about is the current state of support for neurodivergent students in higher education with our special guest, Sol Willian. I'm pretty sure I pronounced that name correctly. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Probably. I think it's Willian. Yeah, Willian. Close.
Oh, okay. I was sort of looking at it like it sort of looks like my name William, but with an N. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
we might as well go like that. But thank you so much for joining us. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Yeah, nice. So before we do get stuck into this, what we might do, we'll just do a little bit of housekeeping, all that. If this is the first time listening to the show, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media platforms. We're available on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn, and we're also available on all podcasting platforms. If you are listening to us from there, please rate this show. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube because it helps with the algorithms and it helps get it out to more people. So the more support we can get, the better. Photon John, what do you think of that one, brother?
Good, man. Good. You got
nice.
that now.
I'm getting it pretty well, aren't I? Yeah. Also, too, if you've got any questions for us during the live podcast, which we are currently in at the moment, please feel free to put it into the comments there and we can add it in as we go. Now, I tell you what, I think this is a really great topic. I think that when we think about neurodiversity, especially in higher education, we're still missing the point a lot of the time, you know. So I think coming on today, having a chat about this is great. I'm seeing a lot of higher education providers really working towards it, but we're still missing the point in some areas when we go like that. But so before anything, for our listeners, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Me. Cool. I can do that. So my name is Sol. I am still getting used to my surname as well because I've had it for about 2 years now. And my husband's Australian. I've been born in Israel. So I've been here for about 6 years, ish, plus minus.
Nice.
More or less. I have a bit of an interesting relationship with the whole neurodivergent side of myself. Like many other, young female presenting neurodivergent folk, I was not actually diagnosed as neurodivergent until quite a bit later. So I went through my bachelor's degree undiagnosed. That was interesting. That's more for later. And I ended up sort of finding myself getting really interested in this field and just in, I guess, advocacy for inclusion and diversity in general. And ended up going and studying what I'm doing currently, which is studying towards a master's of social work.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. It's interesting to hear about I meet so many people who do like a bachelor's or whatever, and then don't even realize at the time that they were neurodivergent, and then they're getting diagnosed afterwards, type of thing. Out of curiosity, what were, looking back at it now, what did it what makes you go, well, what are those aha moments? Like, you must be like, oh my God, now I know why when I was doing this, I was burning out, or I was doing this, or I was doing that. What was the thing?
I have very many. How much time have you got? I'll have a think. I'll try to have a think about one that's like uni related. I think that like when I learned that, and I'm probably going to mention that again later because it's something that's been quite, I think, really important for me to realize when it comes to education and just university in general. Seeing that I still struggle with getting through things that I need to get through when I'm not interested in them. That idea of the paradox of being really organized, but also really struggling to stick to that organization, where it makes a lot of sense where I would create this whole like study plan and go like super meticulous and be like, yeah, I've got this, and then be absolutely like incapable of actually following it. And then get really frustrated at it and just, sort of project that frustration at myself, which probably is not a great way of dealing with it. And when I heard that is like stereotypically sort of like in lists and organization, but then struggling to follow it, is very much like an like autism ADHD sort of combo fun thing. It's
I've learned to just use lists for memory, but nothing else. I can't really organize my day that way. It can be a thing that can remind me, oh, I need to do that. I think I'm feeling inspired to do that thing today, but I can't follow it to the letter very well.
To be fair, I think that some of my aha moments were actually not necessarily education related, because I've always been a massive nerd, and just like that stuff. But my diagnosis has, like, long story short, my diagnosis was sort of brought about kind of by accident, kind of not, where I was still am going through some chronic illness problems. And at the time, my younger sibling was getting diagnosed with autism as well. And at that time, they attributed my gastrointestinal symptoms to potentially, it's a tricky story, but they essentially at some point told me, oh, you've got this physical stuff, but this is too severe for it to be only physical, hence you must have some sort of eating disorder, and try to sort of keep me in hospital for that. Spoiler, it was not an eating disorder, and it was actually at that particular specific thing, rather than being ARFID, it was me being quite autistic and always a very picky eater. So when you call an Oreo evil, and a dietitian hears that and decides that is disordered, I think I look back and I just wonder how, like, 5 different dietitians didn't even consider that.
That's so interesting, because we actually had a guest on a few weeks ago now who was talking about her eating disorder, and she was like, she was like, her daughter is autistic. She isn't autistic, but she's ADHD, but she has autistic traits. And she said, if I had been diagnosed for a lot of these traits earlier with her ADHD, probably she would have not had such a difficult time with eating disorders and that growing up.
That's unfortunately actually a very common pattern that you see, especially with females that I diagnosed later, having that sort of association or even a correlation between being late diagnosed with autism, so not having those supports earlier on, and being labeled as certain behaviors or certain things. So you see those like higher rates of depression, anxiety, eating disorders. It's actually quite common, unfortunately. Another one I think often they misdiagnose, because women they get misdiagnosed with BPD rather than autism, which is a whole other thing as well.
Yeah, so you're getting the wrong information, you're trying to trick. And I've often heard about that from female friends of mine who they had to almost like be convincing their doctor that, hey, no, it's not this. I'm pretty sure it's this type of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It sucks when it gets to that.
I still have like pretty frequently the good old, but you don't look autistic. Conversations, health professionals too. I mean, I've straight up had to have like health professionals look at me and say, nah.
I used to have it a bit with friends where even if they did sort of accept it, you could tell they were kind of looking at me going, I don't know. And then, then they'd be getting annoyed at me later for displaying autistic behavior. And I'd be like, this is what I told you about. Like,
that's the thing. It's people have this very specific idea of what it is in the mind, and then you don't fit that, so hence you cannot be that.
But But it was interesting, especially when I first was hanging out with you, Kev, going back, 14 years or whatever, however long we've been hanging out or whatever, right? The thing that I sort of like, you would tell me that you thought you were, because you weren't actually, you told me you thought you were autistic because you didn't have a diagnosis back then. But for me, I didn't even like think twice about it. I didn't think, but he doesn't look. I didn't honestly think twice about it. I was just like, I think I must have been like, I know I'm dyslexic. Do you know what I mean? So it was sort of like, it didn't matter type of thing. So your environment is sometimes just, sorry.
It's actually super interesting because I have like kind of a similar experience, but I knew at some point when I was a teenager, especially, I knew something was different. I mean, I was like, surely different. Wasn't quite interested in everything that some of my friends were, just different. And then I went on my very first date with someone that at the time said he had Asperger's, which is not quite a term we use anymore, but still. And then I was thinking that I see a couple of behaviors, but I'm not like him, so surely not. So it was my own sort of prejudice almost, and just not being knowing any better.
I was the same. I was the same with ADHD. I knew I had autism. I'd known it for years. Got the diagnosis. Was like, yep, that makes sense. And then my therapist goes, but also, and I was like, what? And I was like, ADHD. I had a completely, even though I've known Will for years, and I've known people with ADHD for years, I just had this idea in my head of what ADHD was, and didn't know how different it could present between. So I just never considered it for myself.
Well, and I was the exact same. So I was like, I like my perception of ADHD back in the day was some crazy nutter running around like, you know what I mean? Like the hyperactive type of stuff.
Because that's how they used to explain it to kids in school and stuff. I remember the teachers telling us that is what it would be like,
But it wasn't until I got into the neurodiversity space and started to be like, I always used to be known as like the dyslexia guy. And then once I sort of like got into the community more and started speaking to people, I used to think, gee, is that me? It can't be me. I'm not like, not crazy, but like hyperactive everywhere type of thing. But certain traits, I remember I would be like, oh my God, I would read about it. I'd be like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I tick that box. And it wasn't until like a good friend of mine said, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're this. You need to come in and do this. But yeah, crazy. But anyway, we should probably move on because we're doing such an ADHD thing right now. But awesome information anyway. But you tell you what, like we've come on to speak about neurodiversity, especially in higher education and the support. So, you know, tell us a bit about the work as a disabilities officer in general. So, you know, tell us about your role and tell us about what you do exactly.
I'd say it's quite a unique role. I think a lot of the student executives roles, especially at the student union, are quite unique because we find ourselves in this position of being students ourselves and still being somewhat, I guess, motivated by our personal experience and lived experience when it comes to some of the stuff we do. And we learn as we go as well. But we are also expected to have, I guess, a bit of a representative position where people might come to us with needed advice or support or to create events for them. And then we find ourselves in this sort of place where we are responsible for a little bit of everything. And that sounds like a lot, but it is kind of a lot because we end up having, as a part of the union, you have a little department and all the different departments will have different student executives. So disabilities is one of them. And myself and one more officer, Sophie, we essentially co-officer that position where it involves both maintaining a physical room where folks at the university, so students with disabilities, can actually go and recover and rest, get some food, socialize, and etc. Which I'll tell you a bit about that space maybe later, probably. And then it goes from that physical maintenance to advocating on a university administration level when it comes to policies and procedures or creating social events or professional opportunity events or just a wide variety of anything someone attending university with a disability might be interested in.
You said something at the panel that you asked me to speak at that I really liked about, you know, I don't care whether or not I can see your disability. We're here to support you.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I wish I had heard more of that growing up.
That's kind of, I try to live by what I wish I had more earlier. That's kind of some of my philosophy is what I think would have been better practice is something that I can practice myself. So it's the idea of I felt judged, I felt misunderstood or alienated or any of those adjectives you can probably think of. And I actively try to change that within our collective and within the union and the department in any way I can, really. I wish we didn't have the issue of feeling like imposters. My psychiatrist actually called it a bit of an imposter syndrome for people that are neurodivergent, being like, oh, surely not. I'm normal. I'm just not good enough, or things like that. It's all those feelings of like invalidation, feeling like you can't actually do it when it comes to university, for instance, that I try to change. So, yeah.
We actually did a cool episode on here with sorry, Dr. Matt, I can't remember your last name if you're listening, but
Dr. Matt Sakreski.
On imposter syndrome and its prevalence, particularly in neurodivergent people, and it was really interesting chat because you're forced to explain yourself more than with no disrespect to anyone with another disability, but for instance, someone with a wheelchair, everyone just goes, oh, okay, you're in a wheelchair, and they make accommodations,
but also too.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, but what I was going to say is that for such a long period in our lives, especially in in early education, all that, we're constantly failing and making mistakes or whatever like that, not fitting into society or being the norm, that when you do start to do some good or you're doing well or whatever, it's sort of like you were talking about imposter syndrome before. You start to think, well, no, I can't do that because I've always been this way. And I think that was what used to hold me back a lot of the time until I really got to a point of like, no, stuff that. I'm just going to keep pushing forward and make it happen type of thing. But it can be very difficult to get past that point.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I have an interesting, complicated relationship with that imposter syndrome idea, because you can feel that on different levels, professionally, personally. It can take a pretty wide variety of forms, and it's quite interesting because it was one of the very first things, one of the very first things that I actually had to deal with as a disability officer is whilst I'm still learning what does it mean to be a disability officer, because essentially they give you this role, this description, and tell you to run with it. You are essentially bound by some categories set by the government of what is allowed to be spent on, which is, again, quite open to interpretation sometimes, but essentially has to do with student support. And then you're essentially told, okay, go crazy, build a budget. And one of the very first things I had to really deal with and then consider is, while making that budget, people walking up to us during orientation, and the very first things they say is, am I allowed to join you? And people will say the disability collective or Neurodivergent or CR events, and genuinely walk up to us and say, oh, like, I don't know if I'm allowed. And it just breaks my heart, because one of the things that we really hope is that people realize that, first of all, if you're an ally, you're welcome to engage anyway. I mean, for disabilities and people with disabilities to be included as a part of society, they need to be treated as a part of society, not like a separate section.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's this sort of like, am I allowed to ask? Am I allowed to explore, that people sort of shy away from? And then we get those situations when people think they have to prove it to me that they're disabled. And they don't actually realize that if they tick yes to, I have a mental or physical disability, they're automatically a member. And it's just up to them if they want to engage.
Just out of curiosity, sorry to interrupt.
No, even.
We've come across, we've had a lot of interesting conversations around this over however many episodes over 2 years. Where some people, do you find among the younger generation, there's a conversation happening about the term disability when it comes to neurodivergence?
I think so. Yeah.
Because we actually had someone come on, especially around safety, a few months ago now, that they actually didn't they identified as neurodivergent, but they didn't identify as having a disability, if that makes sense. And it's sort of like, this is where there's this. And so say when someone is going into university, they don't feel disabled, but they might be neurodivergent, so they don't think I need to tick that box type of thing, or state, hey, I need help. You know what I mean? So
there's a lot of different things you can sort of dissect in that. So first of all, if you were to ask me, the title disability officer is just a title that is meant to describe this wide variety of responsibilities rather than saying disabled. We view disability, and we really advocate for viewing disability as, and this is a controversial opinion, this is controversial, it's coming from me, that essentially disability is a cause of the environment you're in, not necessarily the capacities you have. So in a lot of ways, and that's usually quite more relevant to neurodivergent folks, which is the amount of disability you might feel, which is by definition the interruption of your day-to-day life or the difficulty that it might cause, is essentially directly tied to the environment you're part of or in or operate in.
Like a lack of like a non-supportive environment, is that sort of...
A lack of support,
Yeah.
a lack of
The wrong environment, so
even
overstimulated.
your own, so the wrong sort of sensory environment, but even your own sort of understanding and accommodation of yourself. Because at the end of the day, we do a lot of this, oh, I'm meant to do this, or I should be doing that. And that is something that we get trained to think, because we compare ourselves to what we see and we say, oh, we should be functioning like that. And then we sort of think to ourselves, oh, I need to function like that. I should tell myself I need to function like that, and etc. And it becomes this cycle of not even accommodating for yourself, which is one of the reasons that you get that depression and anxiety later on, as you can't really understand why you can't do what people are meant to be doing, and you think that everyone's doing fine, so why can't you? So
yeah, it is interesting, because I think a big thing as well is that, especially people say coming into higher ed, they may not even know what supports they need. So they might say, hey, I'm this, and then people go, well, what do you need? And it's like, well, I don't know. That's why I'm asking. You know what I mean? This is a big thing I'm coming against as well.
Yeah, no, we don't have everyone that is. So, for instance, one of the very first events that we did was what we call the Neurodivergent check-in. So I think it was week 1 or 2 of the semester, where we collaborated with student services at the university, and their team leader and myself, we created a bit of like a presentation talking about things to watch out for, or some advice around university, and just a general check-in of how is the beginning going for you. And we were very, very clear, very explicit in telling people you do not have to have ticked yes to this disability, or answered yes here. You can just turn up if you think you're going to benefit from it. Because people sort of, so here's my interpretation of it. Students pay a services and amenities fee, right? Every student does. It's just mandatory. Most of the budgeting that goes around those student life and student life activities, or any of those sort of events and things that you might be interested outside of that education learning environment, is often funded by those mandatory fees. I'm not going to go and say to someone that has literally paid those fees as well, just like anyone else has, and be like, oh, prove it to me.
Yeah.
And on the contrary, if you say that to people, what does that say about us and wanting to just be normalized?
Yeah.
You know, as so I don't technically, personally, think that my ADHD and autism are necessarily disabling. I will find them disabling at times where it affects my ability to deal with things, and I get overwhelmed. That's the only time it's actually disabling. But other times, like I wouldn't give it up. I wouldn't change who I am, essentially.
It'd be weird, wouldn't it?
It would be weird. And
You'd be like, what do I do now?
I tell people, like, I would not give up that feeling of autistic joy. Like, never. That feeling that you feel when you're super excited about something is just like, oh, it's great.
I'm definitely not making recommendations with regards to whether or not anyone should take medication. It's different for different people. But ADHD medication, I hated it because I experienced silence for the first time, and I was like, but I've spent 40 years with my brain.
Well,
and it was so strange, and I really didn't like it.
That's super interesting, because I sort of got my ADHD diagnosis from taking Ritalin and ADHD medication for my so part of my medical stuff gives me chronic fatigue, like really bad fatigue. So I needed stuff to be able to actually like do stuff during the day and think. And then I was talking to my psych, and she's saying, hey, have you been finding yourself being a bit less impulsive when you've been taking this medication? And it was like, boom.
Wow, yeah, true. The penny dropped.
And it's the funniest thing, because I was like, wait, is it meant to do that? Wait, hold on a second. Oh, yeah.
That's
and
crazy.
It's not necessarily that quiet. It was more so that ability to just do stuff more more.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. But we often hear like say Kanye West, for example, like that dude doesn't take his meds because he it affects his creativity type of thing. And sort of what you're saying, Kev, it quietens your it quietens your brain. I'm assuming that would be the same thing, correct?
It was just so foreign. I didn't,
Different.
I didn't have any thoughts outside of like the one thought that I was having, and I was just like, "What's going on? This is so weird."
It's
And
that
I love
changing
being
sensation.
Yeah, yeah.
And I sort of love having the spontaneous thoughts. Don't get me wrong. There are times where I'm like, oh, man, what was I thinking? Or, man, what was I doing now? But then I love when it's like, you've got a problem you've got to solve, and then it feels like you've just got 100 thoughts running through your brain. It's like, which one do I pick? That one, like picking fruit from a tree type of thing. If that
That's
makes
the
sense.
benefit of being a bit hyperactive. I feel like if you've got more of that inattentive tendencies, it gets a bit less noticeable with that quiet, and more so with it might be more, now that I think of it, it might be actually better for that those inattentive traits rather than
crazy. What we might do, we might go on to the next question here, but definitely awesome conversation. But do you feel that there is a support gap when it comes to neurodivergent students in higher education?
I would say so. I think that even just thinking about the kind of things that we see now, which if you look back probably 2-3 years ago, we're already seeing more than we saw then. I feel like despite not knowing I was neurodivergent during my undergrad, which was about 5 years ago, I wasn't aware of any programs or anything that was being sort of targeting that group of people, especially not in an empowering way. So going back to that sort of check-in that I mentioned, it was an interesting experience because the effort was there, the people were there. It was a really, really lovely sort of getting together. But working on it made me realize that what we're missing here, and what we're missing in general, that gap essentially that I'm seeing, is looking at neurodivergency as a disability, but a disabling disability, if that makes sense. And I'll clarify, because it's more so in that how to watch out for the negative signs, or how do I tell when I'm struggling? How can I tell when I'm about to hit a wall? How do I know if I'm about to burn out? Which are good things to be able to detect. But at the same time, focusing on that makes people focus on that. And then you end up with services that are targeted towards how to get help with anxiety and depression, how to get help with your stress around exams, how to sort of those reactionary services almost, when you're not looking at empowering people for just being who they are and approaching it from the very beginning, from the get-go, being like...
Because, sorry to cut in there, because if we were to look at, say, and I get what you're talking about, where they're really trying to look at the negative parts of it, but we could potentially be looking at it from putting in other supports where those negatives aren't the thing that would happen as much, because people would maybe be dealing with it differently. Like, say, for example, maybe we're burning out because, we're stressed out because we've got so many exams or
it's not
assignments
maybe.
due. And we're burning out because of that, but there's been no plan in place to help me structure when I need to start my assessments or anything like that. So that's why I'm burning out, because
sometimes they'll focus on those. Sometimes they'll focus on the practical tips, and they can be actually, so when you see those administrative or the student services sort of programs, they can be quite good with those sort of structured, how to come up with learning plans, but they don't quite have that how to embrace and even utilize the fact that your brain works different to your advantage, and working with it rather than trying to use those more, I guess, works for everyone usually sort of solutions. And
See,
no, go.
Oh yeah, sorry. I think like when I was studying, what I found was at the beginning, it was and this is pretty much explaining my brain, it was a mess. Do you know what I mean? When I'm like, I had no structure. I was, I didn't know when to start an assignment. I'd sort of leave it for a while because I'd like, I've got weeks, But towards the end, I sort of came up with a lot of strategies to be able to cope with it a lot better because I'd been through so much at that point. But I thought to myself, why aren't we trying to help people get those strategies earlier than trying to come in with a big mess and then be really great towards the end? But think how more effective we could be if those strategies were in place to start with.
Yeah, so it's really talking about that. Really what you mentioned is that even earlier diagnosis is not waiting for that moment where things are about to explode to, deal with it and acknowledge it, but actually say, hey,
to avoid this from happening, why don't we look at this?
And it's even more than that, because when you look at neurodivergent folks, and I'm talking specifically, like in this case, I'm talking about neurodiversity in the realm of ADHD and autism, because that's my experience. But I do know that for some people, neurodiversity can be quite different. But speaking from that side of it, I think that my way of learning and the way I approach things as well would be quite different. And sometimes trying to follow those more general aimed at holistic sort of brains just doesn't work for me. And it can create that frustration, which goes back to that internal frustration. And understanding why your brain works the way it does, why you think the way you do, and how to actually use that to your advantage. Because I'm a firm believer in neurodivergent folks like ADHD, autism. If you use your strengths, which I think most folks with autism will agree, there's something that there's the things you're really good at and the things you're really quite not liking and not great at.
Oh shit.
And sort of, yeah. And if you work on that, then you might actually have a much nicer time.
And probably knowing what those are is so important, and having others know what that is as well is probably important. So for example, let's say part of an assessment may be requiring you to step into doing something that is fully against your weaknesses there, you're going to fully struggle. But if you've got a learning organization behind you that understands that and can potentially put reasonable adjustments into place or change that could make that assessment a lot easier for you.
Look, sorry.
Just quickly, you've spoken a lot, Will, on previous episodes about how, in, for instance, a working environment that is supportive of neurodiversity, you shouldn't even have to identify things necessarily because there will be options available to you to work at your full capacity. I think education needs a bit of that too.
Oh yeah,
it's definitely a work in progress, and like I will say this, right? Like, what I see is that, there are lots of people who have a really good heart and they're really trying their best to support neurodivergent people. But when you're not neurodivergent yourself, or you've got no training about it or anything like that, it can be so difficult to be able to give that right thing across. Now, a hard thing as well, especially as a neurodivergent person, and so I'm assuming you may have come across this, when you're trying to deal with a person who's supporting you and doesn't get what it is you're struggling with, it's like hitting your head against a brick wall. You know what I mean? And this is where it can make it even worse. And and their heart might be in the right place, but it can sometimes even make it worse. And this is where I think, we're talking about the gap. These are these gaps. What can we do to fill those? You know what I mean?
Well, I'll tell you something that I realized very early on when I started my master's degree is, especially in the field that I'm hoping to go into, which is social work. I realized that I'm either going to acknowledge the fact I'm neurodivergent and learn to work with it and try not to fight it as much as I can, or I'm going to burn out. Because that constant masking and having to be in an environment that would not necessarily cater for my needs, or just be beyond what my brain wants to handle at that moment or can handle at that moment, will be enough to burn someone out. And you see those situations, you see people burning out in corporate because those corporate jobs are just not meant for their body and their brain and the way that they work. And it was actually one of the very things that led us to wanting to do that panel that John, you were on, which is talking about that. First of all, how can we do it better? But also showing people that being who they are is not a weakness. Calling it a disability could be a social term. It doesn't have to be something that reflects on you as a person at all, especially when it comes to neurodivergence, because there are ways you can absolutely shine. And hearing that from other people, going from that empowerment sort of shifting narrative almost, is what I'm really hoping to sort of get out there and really make people feel that, because I hear too many times 18, 19, 20-year-olds coming to me and saying, I can't do this, or there's no way. And it's just, yeah.
Can I just say though, the on that panel, the kindness and understanding in that room was really something. I don't know if you can tell, but I was getting teary when I was giving a couple of answers, because I was just like, I'd never seen anything like this before, and it made me so happy to see it happening in a university. It's very that
cool feeling that you get from feeling understood or just feeling accepted. That that feeling when you feel really overwhelmed, even it could be work or study or anything like that, and then you figure out a way to deal with it, and then you go like that feeling of relief. That is what I'm hoping to replicate for people.
It is getting better. Like when I first got into neurodiversity, I'd be going into D&I events and no one would know what neurodiversity was. And I'd be there. I talk about rejection sensitivity dysphoria and like working to my weaknesses. And I said this on someone's podcast the other week, that when you're back then, I was having to work to my weaknesses to really try and get across what we were trying to be working towards. Back then, it was more about workplace neurodiversity, but it was difficult. But now we are starting to see change, and I think it is coming back to, a lot of neurodivergent people are feeling a lot more comfortable being open about that. People are going, hang on, we need to start putting things into place. People are seeing the strengths and all that, because a few months ago now, I got invited to a thing with the water industry, Australian Water, I think it's called Australian Water Association, so AWA or something, down here in Sydney. And they had an actual workshop about how can they incorporate more neurodivergent people into the water industry. And I was like, it was like, this is cool. This is what we need to see. Can other industries replicate that? So, doing these things, hopefully it's going to open the book to other organizations, all of that, trying to replicate that. Universities, colleges, vet colleges, all that type of stuff, to be able to really grow. But we do still have a bit of a way to go.
Well, I think what you said before is... Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
No, you go.
It's just what you said before, which is you need to have people with the actual experience of being neurodivergent involved in those, in designing those services and delivering those services, because it makes a difference. It comes from, this is what I think you're going and experiencing, to I'm experiencing this too.
It's funny that it's almost like representation matters or something.
Yeah, but can I say on that, right? Yes, we do. But we need to, so those people need to listen to the neurodivergent voices. Because the biggest thing I come up against a lot of the time, and it's like, look, we need to, and like I said, there's so many people with a good heart out there who really want to help create change. And I love these people. Thank you so much. But sometimes what I'm seeing is that those people aren't taking in everything that the neurodiversity community is saying. And it's like, they're trying to do something. And it's like, what the hell are you doing? You've got to take this process. Why haven't you taken that process? And then they'll turn around to you when it doesn't work and go, what the hell happened? And it's like, well, didn't I tell? Well, yeah, exactly. And that's the biggest thing I'm finding. Sometimes people are just not listening and going, oh, gee, maybe I should start listening to what's going on instead of, gee, we've got to make this happen type of thing.
Yeah, they read about it and they maybe know a neurodivergent person and think they have the idea without actually doing a whole lot.
Or they've done certain things in the past and that's worked, but, has it worked? Do you know what I mean? How do you know that it's worked? Do you know what I mean? And then if you've got like proper professionals and people who understand this environment coming in and saying, hang on, no, this isn't right. Maybe those past programs didn't work or whatever that was, if that makes sense. But I tell you what, why do you think there's this gap exists? But why, we've spoken about it. Why do you think that gap exists?
A change in narrative and just a change in any sort of form of practice is something that takes time. I mean, if you're looking at what neurodiversity is as a term, it's very young. So is autism relatively, ADHD. A lot of our understanding of what being neurodiverse is really new. I mean, until recently, we could not be both autistic and ADHD.
Yeah.
It just based on diagnosis, it was not technically possible. So that evolving understanding is also, I generally think that evolution of understanding is happening also within the neurodivergent community itself. And we are, as you said before, not always the best at knowing what is good for us. It's a bit of a downfall, very much a downfall. And we're working on that too. And we're still learning to say, actually, this is what we're needing to advocate for, or this is what actually helps, or really identifying where people are actually trying and where the intentions are good. And it's a process and it's just going to take time and it's heading in the right direction, but definitely still early stages.
And it is baby steps. And I think I was creating a PowerPoint yesterday, actually, because I'm doing a presentation for an organization called VELG, who do a lot of stuff in higher education, especially in the vocational education sector. And I put it together and I just brain dumped so much information, right? And the thing is that, yes, there is a lot of information and there is a lot of things that need to be in place to make neurodiversity fully neuro-inclusive in any organization, right? But it's not about going, you need to meet all of these. It's about going, okay, what have you already got in place and what can we start implementing slowly? Do you know what I mean? Because it's like anything. It's like us as neurodivergent people. If we try to do everything at once, we will burn out. You know what I mean? So just taking those little baby steps is going to be better than not doing anything at all, if that makes sense.
Well, it's also about the idea of, I lost my train of thought. Very ADHD of me.
No, it's all good. We won't judge you. We do this all the time.
No judgment.
I had something good and...
Well, what we might do, how about we go to the next question, and when it comes to you, just go, hey, look, this has come back to me.
Oh, by the way. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sweet. So what are some examples of where higher education needs to do better?
Well,
we sort of covered that a little bit before, right?
A little bit. I had this interesting chat today to some higher ups at the university that are actually looking at some construction related stuff, and I found myself explaining to them the difference between like the physical disability and having a disability and accommodating for disabilities, for instance, a disability room, and then also looking at the functional capacities and needs of people, where it comes to other hidden disabilities, sensory needs, and things like that, and why it's not the same thing. And there's still a lot of this like misunderstanding around sensory needs are a luxury, or those spaces where the temperature is controllable and you have the backrest that is the most comfortable to you, or etc., is optional and it's a luxury. And people don't quite understand that sensory disorders are very much real, for instance, if we're talking about this example. So looking at not imposing their own definition of what a disability is or what being neurodivergent is, and going to the community and saying, hey, like, what do you guys need? And I feel like it's something that we are getting a little bit more of, thankfully. I got the opportunity to do a bit of that advocacy today, but that's one of the reasons that student unions or having student representatives or just lived experience, like people that are, you know, living and breathing what they're trying to cater for, at least to give the input of, is still something that we're very much advocating for.
No. That's cool.
Awesome.
That's cool. So what might be some steps a higher education provider should have in place?
Sorry, repeat that.
I really didn't say that well, did I? So what might be some steps a higher education provider should have in place? So, for example, let's say I'm a new student. What should be in place to help me have the best experience possible? So, you know, do we have sensory environments, or do we have what are your thoughts, especially from what you've seen from your side of things?
I guess from my side of things, it would be thinking about that, those sensory needs, those needs that are both those, you know, physical accessibility, and having just an easier time to those functional needs. It gets pretty interesting because it's really thinking about bringing people to that best capacity that you can bring them to, and seeing how you can accommodate for that, hopefully, which is not always the case, but then like possible. But then that's really what we aim to do when we do accommodations, or like when we take certain steps to like help people out, is bringing them to like the best version of them that they can be, and hopefully within the capacities of that organization. And when it comes to universities, it's really, really wide. Like, there is very much a need to have systems in place that allow people to get the adjustments they need and to get the accommodations they need on a more academic or teaching level. That's one that we constantly fight for, especially recognition of neurodivergent needs without having to go through that like $3,000 sort of assessment that the university sometimes requires you to get those adjustments. It's recognizing the use of assistive technology in ways that people might use them, and having to sort of catch up with the times, rather than just think any use of technology is inherently plagiarism. We've had quite a bit of that as well, or they just outright ban it when it's something people quite just need. And just keeping that policy and procedures open mind, almost, to being open to changing and amending practices. Because otherwise, if, you know, exactly like you said, they created the policy and then who gave feedback? How do you know if it's actually working? So being able to provide that feedback and saying, hey, this is something we need to change, something we should make easier. We have that all the time. We are at the moment talking to the university about a good couple different things of just even amending procedures of how is someone allowed to do something, just to make everyone's life easier without problem. So, yeah.
No, that's cool. That's cool. So, you know, moving on from that, what are a few examples of ideas you've advocated for in your role?
Have we kind of covered this?
Yeah, we sort of did, didn't we?
Yeah. Very much that like empowerment perspective and sort of strength-based approach, if you want to call it, when it comes to being neurodivergent. And saying, oh, these are the ways I can thrive, rather than think about the ways you might fail, or you might not meet the expectations that there are.
Yeah.
It's very much something that I try to advocate for and also support people in sort of achieving that, because even today I had to try to convince someone that it's okay to accommodate for your needs, even though you are absolutely, I believe you are capable of doing what you think you already set out to have without those accommodations. There's no reason you shouldn't have them, you know, if they're there.
No, yeah, totally. Yeah, I think, accommodations are, for me, it's been a game changer, not just in study, but life. I actually wrote an article about this today, and it makes it easier for the people around me as well. Because back in the day, say like I wrote did an assignment, I would have to wait for my mom to get home or whatever, or my wife or whatever it was. And then they would have to read over a 5,000 word assignment. And, that's crap. Do you know what I mean? Now I'm able to use certain tools that can do that for me. I feel more independent, and that gives me more confidence to want to be able to, could be more study.
Express yourself as well.
What's that?
To express yourself as well.
Yeah, it is, because I can now go, oh, look, how can I explain something? Because like being dyslexic, it can be sometimes hard to get from what's here onto paper and make it sound right. But now I can put what's in here onto paper. It might not sound right. And I can say, can you make this sound proper? And I'll read it back. I'll be like, oh my God, that sounds brilliant.
Yeah.
And it gives you, it's given me, I would say, a whole new lease of life, because I feel more independent.
I actually just discovered last week. So obviously with the ADHD, with the autism, I love data and sheets, and I can see patterns in them that other people can't, and do my job really well. But with the implementation of stuff, I have to write a lot of data for the back end of websites. And that's just the ADHD in me goes, and I'll put the task off and stuff. But then I figured out the right prompt, and I was like, hey, can you please write this with this many characters, including these words? And then just boom, 30 seconds. I'm like, oh, that would have taken me 4 hours. That's amazing. And I checked it all, and it was great.
See, that's actually another thing. That's another thing I advocate for, which, sorry, I cut you off. You continue, and then I'll talk.
No, you go.
That's a real world example of assistive technology, helping me accommodate certain issues that I might have because of my ADHD.
Tell me if you disagree, but one of the things I've been advocating for is really appreciating people's work for the quality of the work, not necessarily the amount of time they spend on it or the amount of perceived time they've spent on it. Like moving away from that, I've worked here all day, 12 hours, I've woke up, to actually looking at the quality of the work and saying, wow, that's great and efficient. And judging people's, I guess, not even judging people, just looking at people's work for what it is rather than how they necessarily got there. Of course, keeping it ethical and correct and all that. But at the same time, moving away from that culture of hard working equals a lot of time versus hard working equals good work.
Well, to tell you the truth, can I just say, like, back in the day, I would have to spend more time on something because I'm neurodivergent and I'd struggle with things. I'm now able to get more done, which helps me to be better. Do more, and be more effective and get across what I've always struggled to get across and all of that type of stuff. But no, hey, Food on John, we've got one more question, but I think we've run out of time. We've really
sorry.
Don't say sorry, but I think we might wrap it up there because we've gone over some really great stuff there, and this has been really when we find that a chat, when we've got questions left over, that it's been a really good chat, and it's been really great talking to you today, hearing your experience, and especially later diagnosed person as well. So thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Thank you for letting me share it.
No, not a problem. This is what it's all about. And I think so many of our listeners are similar to yourself. So I think it is really important to hear about that. But before we do close it off and everything, where can people connect with you, find out more about your work? I saw you connected with me on LinkedIn today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm not actually super often on LinkedIn. I'm more so an Instagram person.
Okay.
If you want more of those aesthetic autism moments. But generally, a lot of my work is going to be through UQ Disabilities. So the UQ Union Disabilities has its own page, socials. You'll find us on Discord as well.
Yeah, cool. So check you out there and hit you up. Photon John, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we close off today?
No, just again, thank you, Sol. That was really cool.
Thank you.
I appreciate that you came on.
I don't actually know how many or if watching, so just thank you for whoever was watching it as well.
Yeah, no. Well, it's hard to sort of tell because we got people through our Facebook channel who will be watching. We'll also have people through our LinkedIn and YouTube pages, also through our Twitch pages. Then we've got the podcast, which will come out in a matter of about an hour. So there's probably a fair few people watching you or listening, depending what they choose to do. But no, look, Sol, thank you.
I hope it was helpful. Even with me being a bit all over the place because I'm tired.
It's honestly, it was so encouraging meeting you and seeing the event, and knowing that the younger generation are going to have that little bit not easier, but they're going to have the support that they need.
Really hope so.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. But for all of our listeners out there, if you haven't already done so, please connect with Sol if you want. And if you haven't already done so, please connect to all of our social media platforms. My name's Will Wheeler. This is my co-host, Photon John, and this is Neurodivergent Mates. Till next time.